Back here on the Cover 3 podcast, live on CBS Sports Network. Well, every single Tuesday, we like to take you inside the matchup of one of the biggest games ahead in the Big Ten. And it doesn't get much bigger than Indiana's chance on the big stage. That's right, 3:30 p.m. Eastern Time on CBS, America's Most Watched Network, the network of stars, that we are going to see Curt Cignetti's group still undefeated, deep into the season, going up against the reigning champions. Now, look, it tells you exactly how Indiana and Michigan season has gone, that the odds makers have made the Hoosiers a 2-touchdown favorites against the Wolverines. But as we go inside this matchup, Tom, where are some of those advantages? What is it that Indiana is doing well that Michigan is not? Where do you think the game could end up being decided?
How much time do we have in the segment? I mean, what's Indiana doing well that Michigan's not? Pretty much everything. Like, I think if you look at the Hoosiers offense in particular, they can throw the ball and run the ball. They're not just forced to do one. Even when they lose their starting quarterback, who they've stuck with all year, to an injury, their backup is able to come in and they're still able to run a competent offense, even if they're running the ball a lot more regularly than they would have been with Curtis Rourke. But just to genuinely answer your question, I think Indiana just has more talent at the skill positions, which is a ridiculous thing to think about when you consider how Indiana has recruited over the years compared to how Michigan is supposed to be recruiting. But the one thing that Curt Cignetti did that has really worked in Indiana's favor since he took the job from James Madison, he brought a lot of good players with him from James Madison. He went in the transfer portal and got a lot of good players from smaller schools. Instead of looking at just, talent and athletic ratings, he was getting productive players, thinking, all right, they can be productive. They're veterans. They've been in this before. They're not new to it. We can get them in and we can put together a good team. Did he really think he was going to have this good of a team? He'll say he did. I don't know if I believe that so much, but the Hoosiers are just a very good team. They're good on offense. They can put up points. Defensively, they've been very sound. They do not have superstars. They do not have a bunch of NFL players, kind of like what you're going to see on the side of the ball for Michigan. But they play smart, they play well, they're disciplined, they don't get out of their gaps, they don't make many mistakes, and they put pressure on you and force you into making those mistakes. So just overall, this is a very good, very well-coached football team, which is something that I'm not sure we can say about Michigan at this point.
Totally agree with Tom. I don't think that Curt Cignetti could have known just how good this team was going to be when he put it together. He may have had an inkling in spring when he saw, we have the Curtis Rourke that Ohio had 2 years ago when healthy, except somehow he's continued, to progress. He's playing like as well as his brother used to play. And now, that means we have an upper third, upper quartile quarterback in the Big Ten at least, and probably even better than that. There was probably some, maybe question in his mind, what happens when the lights actually come on, right? Given his injury history, how's he going to be when he's actually taking hits? But he had to know during practice, we got something here. We constructed a team we thought could make a bowl. Maybe a bowl +1. But if you're going to give me one of the best damn quarterbacks in the conference on top of a really experienced, almost like G5 All-Star team, if you will, I think then he probably knew. Tom nailed it. I think the D-line, though, for Indiana has been a real, just absolute boon for them. They wrecked Michigan State last weekend. That was the key to make sure that game didn't get away from them.
Yeah, you know why I think he knew he had a good team? Because he coached a lot of them back at James Madison. I've said that a few times. I mean, bringing in 14 players with you from James Madison and bringing your, coordinators, bringing Bryant Haynes, who was a finalist for the Broyles Award in 2023 to run the defense. I think he had an inkling that he probably had guys with great attitude, with, adequate skill set of athletic talent. And the big question was, well, how do we stack up against bigger, stronger, faster? And I think where the edge comes in is clearly they've shown they can stack up with majority of Big Ten teams. Now, does that test come against Ohio State? We'll see. And potentially against Michigan, we'll see. Because this is probably the best defensive that they've faced. But in this transfer portal era where teams are still trying to figure out the balance of recruiting versus new guys versus, do we go, what level do we get players from? The one thing that we can all value is continuity. And this team, they know exactly what is being asked from them. And the defense specifically is the thing I wanted to highlight. Bud brought it up. Mikhail Kamara leads the Big Ten with sacks, 9.5 sacks. he's a James Madison transfer. James Carpenter, their nose tackle, James Madison transfer. Jalen Walker and Aiden Fisher, two linebackers, both transfers from James Madison. And then D'Angelo Pons, their corner, a James Madison transfer. You know what I've realized they taught really, really well at James Madison? Tackling. They're just a really good, fundamentally sound team, which shouldn't surprise us considering Cignetti's background all the way to his days learning under Nick Saban. So I think this is just a really good football team that has the right mindset, that came in hungry to prove people wrong. And now you throw in that confidence they're playing with. They're just a really good football team right now.
0 net yards allowed in the fourth quarter by that Indiana defense in that game against Michigan State. And it started out, it was like 128, 50, 25, 0. They are well coached. They are relentless. They put themselves in the right position. And to your point, Danny, they go out there and they do everything fundamentally sound. It is a joy to watch in this era where it does seem like, greatness can only be achieved by the super splashy names that everybody knows coming into the season in July, when Indiana has names that we have to learn. Like guys that weren't on our radar that we're able to just say, like, look at the way that they are playing. Let's make sure to give them flowers. Let's make sure to put them in the spotlight. So great job of evaluation. Great job of roster construction. Curt Cignetti ruining the year one expectations for coaches all across the country, because no one's going to be able to replicate this. But what about the other side? Because technically, even though Sherrone Moore has wins as a acting head coach, this is also year one of the Sherrone Moore era. And there have been, in obviously like some of the wins, moments where you can see it all put together. There have been even in some of the losses where the Wolverines within games have gotten close only to fall just short. So like, Danny, it's very clear that Michigan is not anywhere close to the expectation. It's very clear that this is a Michigan team that has to start thinking about what next year is going to look like. But as they look to finish this thing out, what do you think is the identity of the Michigan Wolverines right now?
Well, I think they found it when Jack Tuttle decided to retire and they realized Davis Warren was going to have to be their guy, because I think everyone kind of knows it's not Alex Orji, but yet they do realize they have a pretty good weapon running the football. So I think we saw what they're going to be the last month of the season, which is they're going to try to be physical, something we've always seen from them the last 2 years. Davis Warren is the quarterback, but you'll still get a sprinkling of Alex Orji in there to run some wildcat, to run a little bit of gadgety plays. And then you're still going to try to lead with Donovan Edwards and Kalel Mullings. The defense, to me, is the thing that I wonder about as the injuries start to mount up. Both corners, Will Johnson, missed last week. Is that something that starts to potentially be an issue for this Michigan defense, which, kept them in a lot of games? That, to me, is what I wonder. And then where's the mindset of this team? They've fallen so far short of expectations. We've talked about, putting teams on quit watch. Like, where is their mental psyche? Like, is this, and clearly I think you'll get it against Ohio State, a rivalry game. But, if Indiana can knock this out of them, what type of fight do they put forward? And they'd still put forth good effort against Oregon. Like, that game was not an easy one for Oregon, but I don't think they're good enough to compete with Indiana or Ohio State in the back end of their season.
One of the areas that Michigan really had to stay healthy this year was in the secondary. Okay. They lost one of their best players to Alabama in the transfer portal in the offseason. They lost a number of guys to the draft. They also lost one of their top safeties back in spring to an ACL. And they've also lost 2 more guys. And at least in my preseason notes, it's like, this is a spot where the drop off from starter to backup is huge. And I think you're seeing that now. And you could say, hey, the new DC didn't do a very good job early on this season. I think that's probably fair. Martindale, to me, has been a pretty big drop off from what they had last year. But now you're dealing with probably lesser coaching and also a lot lesser quality of player in the back end. And so I think people are able to get Michigan with some of the quick game stuff. The defensive line is not getting as much of a chance to get home, and that's sort of diminished one of the bigger advantages that Michigan has had. If they're going to win this game, they really got to have the offense step it up, because I don't think they're going to hold Indiana to like 14 or 17.
You mentioned the injuries in the secondary, and they have had a huge impact, and they've also impacted the way that Michigan has been able to play on defense. Like early in the year with Wink Martindale, they were very much a blitz-heavy team. They haven't blitzed nearly as much because they don't trust their corners and their safeties to hold up in that kind of man coverage as much as they did early in the year. It turns out losing Will Johnson kind of impacts the way you could cover teams. But if you look beneath the hood, while that's been the case, like the last 3 weeks when they've been without Will Johnson for the most part, their pressure rate has actually gone up without the same number type of blitzes that they had. Their blitz to pressure ratio is actually improving quite a bit. And that's the one interesting aspect of this matchup to me, because as we talked about with Indiana, they don't have the talent that this Michigan team has as far as, like recruiting ratings and NFL draft profiles. But you can argue that while Indiana has not had the most difficult schedule, even if Michigan is not a team that most of the people in the country are going to look at and say that's a good football team because they're going to look at their record, this is far and away the most talented team that the Hoosiers will have faced. So it will be interesting to see, particularly in that Michigan front seven, how the Indiana offensive line operates and holds up. Because if we go back to that Nebraska game, the one in which Curtis Rourke hurt his thumb and missed the second half, Indiana had a pressure rate allowed of 35.3%. That was the highest they've had in any game so far this season. And I would argue Nebraska's defensive line was the best one that they've seen. Michigan's is better. So will Michigan be able to get that pressure, win those battles against the Indiana offensive line, and put that offense in a position that, frankly, it just hasn't been in very often because they haven't really had any kind of pressure to deal with in the pocket. Curtis Rourke has had plenty of time to stand back there, let his guys get open. The running backs have had plenty of lanes. What happens if Michigan is able to take that away? How impactful and how explosive can this Indiana offense be? Now, of course, the problem is even if Michigan's defense does slow Indiana's offense down a bit, can Michigan's offense score enough points to make up for it? I'm not overly optimistic that they can, just because we really haven't seen anything week to week to suggest that that's the case. But if there is any reason for optimism, if you're Michigan, since going back to Davis Warren, as far as an EPA perspective and expected points added per play, they've had their 3 best games on passing offense since making the switch back to Warren. It's still not good, but if you look at it overall, Colston Loveland has been more impactful, especially last week. One aspect of this Indiana defense they've had some trouble with in recent games, they've given up yards and catches to tight ends. Nebraska's Thomas Fedone had 6 for 91 against them. Washington's Kaleki Latu had 5 for 50. Maybe Michigan can find a way to get Colston Loveland much more involved in the offense like we saw last week and get some points on the board because of it. I think that's the way that they're going to have to. If they're going to score points, it's going to be because Colston Loveland has a big game.
Yeah, Michigan with Colston Loveland, with the fact that if it's not even outright trick plays, they're at least trying to be more creative to find ways to get the ball to their star tight end, to be able to get him in those matchup advantages, moving things around, trying to test a team's eye discipline. It is very clearly they are dumping everything out from the bag already, understanding the urgency of the moment. We'll see if Michigan can do it, because the lowest point total for the Indiana Hoosiers this year is 31 points. And we often say, what is the number that you need to win a ball game? Testing like a team like Michigan that's offensively challenged. 31 might be that number that might be a little bit too far for me to expect the Wolverines to reach. All very interesting stuff to keep an eye on as our attention descends on Bloomington, Indiana for the big-time Big Ten Game of the Week on CBS. You can watch it on America's Most Watched Network, the Network of Stars. You can stream it on Paramount Plus.